and welcome to the MVMA YouTube channel. Here, we meet with inspiring voices from the world of music, arts, and humanities, and we share their stories, wisdom, and insights as part of our Voices of Inspiration series. Today, we're honored to welcome Levon Chilingirian, one of the most influential chamber musicians of our time. As the founder and first violinist of the legendary Chilingirian Quartet, Levon has shaped generations of performers through his artistry, curiosity, and uncompromising musical integrity. Beyond the stage, he's a revered teacher and thinker, whose insights into music making go far beyond notes on the page. It's a real privilege to share his voice with you today.
I think the first thing that drew me to chamber music was a complete accident and a crazy thing, because I was a student and a friend of mine who had gone to music college 1 year ahead of me said, "We're losing our first violinist in our quartet." And I told my two other colleagues that a mate of mine is coming next year and maybe he'd be okay. So I joined this already established quartet as the youngest member, and I didn't know the front end of a quartet from the back end of a quartet. And it was straight in with the Debussy quartet, which I would not advise anybody who's got any brains to do as the first piece. And then we did a piece by Bloch, which was even worse technically, but we had a wonderful time. And somehow it evolved into a serious thing, but initially it was very, very, very by chance. But if you include, as I do, chamber music as being pieces for piano and violin, then I was extremely fortunate, again, being at the same place at the same time, that I had a duo partner called Clifford Benson, who saved me on a few hundred occasions, and that's underestimating. He was a magnificent and very understated musician, and it's not until he died, sadly, at a far too young an age, that I realized what he did for me without even me realizing. And so it's a weird way, you're thinking there's a structured way. There's absolutely not. And I would just add as the last thing that I had no real ambitions of any sort of career in music, because I come from a family of prodigies, of which I'm not one for sure. My uncle and my cousin were both real child prodigies. So I had plenty of time to play football when I was growing up, whereas these two poor people were paid to practice and follow musical career. So I had no pressure on me. And the third thing I was going to say was that my late uncle, Mamluk Parikian, at the point when I was going to decide whether I would take up music as a profession, he said to me, "Do not go into this tough profession unless you'll be happy to play at the back of the second violins of a provincial orchestra for the rest of your life. Go away and think about it, and we'll meet in 2 weeks' time." And we did meet, and I thought about it as much as you can as an 18-year-old, and I said, "Yeah, I think I do. I'm not sure, but I think I do." And so everything sort of pointed in the direction of music, and the chamber music was just sheer luck. I think that when we started as a quartet. We tried in our first 3 years of existence to play everything that we could. So in other words, I think we did 20 pieces each year, so it was 60 pieces in the
First 3 years.
By definition, it means that we played a lot of great music without really understanding it. Technically, I suppose we were okay, but certainly if you identify masterpieces like particularly the late Beethoven quartets, I would say that we thought we knew what we were doing, but we were playing like a sort of pilot flying through fog, through mist, and somehow we got away with it. So I would say that during the decades, maybe I've dug 1 or 2 centimeters deeper into these great pieces. It's limitless. And so I think that there were little clues. Like I remember in the very first BBC recording the quartet made, we played the first of the late Beethoven quartets, the E flat, opus 127, and the producer, who was a very famous man, composer, great musician, actually after we did the recording, it was a studio recording, he wrote a letter which I still have in my late Beethoven music, and along the lines of, I thought it was mad for a young quartet to be doing this as the first piece. But he said, I apologize for the fact that I thought you got a lot of things right. So that was lucky. It was instinct rather than intellect. I mean, I was very lucky. I had a cellist who had that instinct, who steered us, kept us on the right track. So over the years, I hope very much that harmony, structure, knowing what the great composers did not do, in other words, when they didn't follow the rules, thereby creating the greatest parts of their pieces. Those things, I guess, I became more and more aware of, but initially it was just, the idea was get a very wide understanding of the repertoire and then dig deeper. So to this day, if I pick up a piece that I played, 200 times, if it's a great piece, it can be a quartet by Haydn, or it can be a late Schubert quartet, it can be a quartet by Bartók, it could be the quintet, of course, of Schubert. Just trying to dig a little deeper. And I think I've learned a lot from my students as well, that they have insights which are very, very, very important. And you have it as a musician. You can develop it, but you have it and you should have it. And so an 18-year-old can show you things that you hadn't thought about, which is amazing. And that's, I think, for somebody like me, that's what keeps me going as well as a musician. This is a very interesting question, and of course the temptation is for me to say students, younger players, play things faster, louder, use more bow, constant vibrato, and immediately I think of examples of my present students who don't do that. But as a general movement, I find that the awareness of the great tradition of performance of the generation to before mine. So I'm thinking about the musicians in the 1920s, 1930s. It's been slightly forgotten, and I find I have to remind myself and I have to remind my students not to listen to the performance that comes up first on YouTube, but really look into proper performances that are historically invaluable. So what has happened? They say the level of playing has gone up. I don't believe that one bit. I think that there are more players who play well. There's more training going on in places like the Royal Academy of Music. That does not mean that if you shot into this building in 1960, that the level of the highest, the best, the most interesting players was any less than it is now. I strongly believe that. So what are the tendencies? Yes, there's more slick playing, which I don't like. There's more a sort of trying for something that is different from the established norm. And I think that that's not enough. In other words, the way that the Amadeus Quartet or the Hungarian Quartet played a Beethoven Quartet is not invalid. It's not something, oh my goodness, well that's no good, now we can do better. And so a tendency for this surface brilliance is, I think, false. I think to try and get inside the music is something that perhaps is not enough time is spent. I would say not only for string players, but for particularly pianists, that the more they spend time playing chamber music, the better they're going to be as soloists. It is something that is so well illustrated by somebody like Richard Good, and many others, but then his name comes to mind, that you have to have a wide knowledge of music outside your territory, and you have to then incorporate it into your narrow band, which is, in my case, violin, chamber music, orchestral playing. And that aspect of it, I think, perhaps is narrower now than it was when I was a student. There were very vivid memories, I suppose, of what would be the defining performance that changed me as a musician. If I can give two very different answers to that, and I think you'll understand when I tell you why I'm going in two directions at the same time. When I was a student, the sort of preeminent string quartet in London and in the world was a group called the Amadeus Quartet. And we were not only lucky to just go to all their concerts, or as many as we could, but we also had lessons from members of the Amadeus Quartet. And I just remember the incredible welcome that they gave to their audience. When they came on stage, it was like they wanted to have a party with us. It was like when you go to a really nice restaurant and the head waiter comes and welcomes you and makes you feel, that you're going to have a great meal. And the Amadeus were like that. They were just so giving. And so then, whatever piece they were playing, and normally it was the great classic classical works and the romantic works, but you know, what comes to mind is Haydn, Schubert, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, let's say. There was this incredible warmth, but tied in with unbelievable virtuosity. So I think when I just sort of heard lots of their concerts, and then I got to know them personally. So that was a huge inspiration for me. On the violin playing side, definitely, it's the recording, because I never heard him play live, the recording of Joseph Szigeti playing the Beethoven Violin Concerto with Bruno Walter as the conductor. And to this day, I think this is the best way to clean out bad and very, very dull performances of the greatest concerto. The way that before Szigeti has played a single note, Bruno Walter presents the opening tutti. In fact, the exposition of the concerto is mind-blowingly. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the different tempi he was taking. I couldn't believe the going forward, the coming back. And then the way then Szigeti plays as well, if not better, than any violinist living now. So again, we're going back to what I said earlier, things haven't improved. In fact, musically, I think they've gone backwards. But the detail and the phrasing and the awareness, and the brilliance of this performance is, for me, is incredible. And I would say also as a sort of footnote that, I had very bad COVID in 2020. I think, as my doctor said afterwards, I had less than 50% chance of living. I had very serious COVID. Then when I got home, I couldn't move my arms, I couldn't walk, it was very serious. And the first thing that got me back to somewhere on the path was to put on a CD, which I hadn't even opened, of Joseph Szigeti playing the Mozart D major concerto with Beecham. And that sort of changed my life, really, and made me feel that I would be able to be all right again. And again, I give that as an example to my students, that if you can find better and more perceptive playing anywhere on earth than that, then I want to hear it, because I know what. So there you are, Amadeus Quartet and Joseph Szigeti, the two. Well, I've been a fan of Crystal Palace Football Club since the day I emigrated from Cyprus to London. So I was 12, and I went to a very, 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 very ordinary school. And all the boys at this school supported this football club I'd never heard of. And they beat me into submission immediately until I agreed to support this thing I'd never heard of, but I knew what football was. And this was many, many years ago. And I've been a long-suffering fan, but a very active fan of Crystal Palace. And I'm very happy to say that in 2025, after 119 years of never winning anything, my team finally won the FA Cup. And I was very happy to watch it with my granddaughter, who is 3 and didn't know what was going on, except she was cheering with me. So that outside activity. The other, I suppose, more serious, you're talking about real activities that from the moment we moved into our house, there were two priorities. One was a space where my quartet could rehearse and we could have house concerts. But the second equal priority was to have a ping pong table, a space large enough to play ping pong. And from the beginning to this day, we play very regularly. I play with my wife, and I have one or two very serious enemies on the table, including a good friend of mine, another Levon, who's a chess grandmaster. And whenever he's in town, we have this extremely aggressive exchange of matches, and each time whoever wins has bragging rights. So football is armchair support, I suppose, but the ping pong is actually incredibly good for reflexes. It's good exercise, and I love playing ping pong as well.